Well, it looks like we're going to be doing some introductions for you again, but just some connectivity issues that we had there, but nothing that you should be worrying about. As you know, it's something that we've never done before, but it's something that we're very excited to be doing at this present moment. Like I said earlier on, this is the virtual presidential Imbizo hosted courtesy of Government Communication and Information System, the GCRS, together with the presidency. Very delighted for making time to be part of this broadcast, a part of this Imbizo this evening. A very good evening to you.
Well, good evening. Here, and I'd like to welcome you all to this very first virtual presidential Imbizo on coronavirus. Whether you are watching on television or listening in on one of our community radio stations, thank you for taking time to join me as we discuss the latest developments around this pandemic that we've been dealing with. I look forward to taking your questions during this broadcast. For nearly 100 days, we managed to successfully delay the spread of the virus by locking down the country. We've had to enter into the lockdown, but now we are in a new and treacherous phase in the life cycle of this pandemic. As we can all feel it, the winter months are now here. And as we had earlier predicted, the number of infections is rising, and the infections are even rising at a much faster pace. A few months ago, many of us could have said that we didn't know of anyone who is infected or anyone who has died from coronavirus. That is sadly not the case any longer. Many of us now know someone. It can be a friend, a colleague at work, a relative, an acquaintance that we know who has now been affected in one way or another. We now have well over 150,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus, of which a third were recorded just in the last week. New cases are being reported everywhere and every day. We are in the midst of a new surge of infections. It is something that our scientists and doctors have warned us well in advance, and we are now experiencing it. But it is also being experienced in many other countries around the world. We've always understood that as more sectors of the economy open up and as more people return to work, this is going to happen. The reality is that we could not remain under lockdown forever. People need to earn a living. Learners need to continue their education. Businesses need to reopen so that they can survive, and for their staff to also keep their jobs and earn a salary. The unemployment figures that were released recently are a great worry to all of us. It is urgent that we must restart the economy after this period of inactivity. The lockdown has enabled us to do a number of things. We've been able to deploy a vast network of community health workers and to scale up the screening and the testing as well. We've been able to strengthen our health care systems by making more beds available, building filled hospitals, opening up new ICU units, and also securing medical supplies and equipment that we didn't have. And as a result, we are able to handle the rise in infections and to treat and care for those who are infected. I must, however, say that our healthcare facilities are under a great deal of pressure. We must remember that to date, many people have also recovered from the virus. So those who go into hospitals are treated and get better and leave hospital. We've rolled out an extensive public awareness and education campaign about hand washing, mask wearing, and social distancing. And we've been spreading the message that people must wash their hands and wear their masks. We've been able to implement programs and policies to support businesses and our people, and particularly those who are also out of work. In the last few months, funds and skills and resources have been mobilized across society to tackle this enormous challenge. The Solidarity Fund, for example, has been vital in getting equipment and supplies to our frontline health workers. The 500 billion rand relief package has been provided to both strengthen the capacity of our healthcare system and to assist companies, but also to assist workers and households that have been badly affected by the lockdown. Banks and insurance companies are providing relief to many of their clients who are in distress. And all across society have also been assisted, but many people are also giving their time to support this cause that we are in of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have done everything we can to cushion our people from the ravages of hunger and poverty in the form of social grants and food parcels to vulnerable households. I know that many of you listening are afraid of what the future holds for you in terms of our work, your jobs, and your ability to earn a living. In fact, you may fear this more than the virus itself. Now, as the Minister of Finance made clear last week, our economy will shrink, unemployment will rise, government will have to borrow more, and at least in the immediate term, South Africans will on average be poorer. But even as our troubles mount, we can see a path to the recovery of our economy, also to the repair of our society. Already we are making plans to rebuild our economy through bold and ambitious public investment in employment. We are going to focus on infrastructure. We're going to construct roads, bridges, dams, water treatment plants, railway lines, and houses. And through this, we want to drive a substantial and lasting economic recovery. Working with business and labor, we are going to scale up existing employment initiatives, and we are also going to support new investment and create new ones. We must not underestimate the magnitude of the challenge that we are facing. and we have to be realistic that it will take some time for our economy to recover. Already before the coronavirus pandemic, our economy was already facing enormous challenges. And it is for this reason that our economy's recovery will take time. What is important is that the work has begun for the recovery process, and we are confident that in the coming months, we will begin to steadily see results. It is important that all of us play our part, as we have done in these past few months. It has been a long 3 months of lockdown. We may be tempted to become relaxed or complacent, but we are nowhere near the end of this pandemic. Now, coronavirus is part of our lives at the moment, and will continue to be so for some time to come. We must accept this reality, as many people around the world are accepting that they must accept that we have to live with this virus until a vaccine is found. We've all seen images being circulated, and this is the worrying part. Images being circulated of people having parties and social gatherings, and know of instances where the numbers of people at funerals or congregational worship are being exceeded, and with people who are not wearing masks. Tonight I want to implore all of us to embrace the regulations with the same vigor that we did in the early days. And I'd like to ask that everyone should be very conscious of the actions that we take, because they impact the safety of those around you. We therefore need to remain vigilant. And of course, the rise in infections is making all of us nervous and anxious. We need to know that our workplaces are safe. We also need to know that our schools are safe, but we are not helpless in the face of this virus. And if we take the necessary precautions, we really do not have to be afraid. If we act and work together as communities, as church groups, as school governing bodies, as taxi associations, as unions, as businesses, as sport teams, we can make our everyday activities much safer. I have no doubt that we will beat this coronavirus. But as I said the other day, we have a second pandemic in our country. Gender-based violence has become a second pandemic in our country. This is another pandemic that we've got to defeat. And there are a number of actions that we need to take, not only to defeat the coronavirus, but also to defeat gender-based violence. We must and will build a more just and more equal society where we respect one another, where we respect the women and girls of our country and children of our country. It is important that as we deal with this virus, we also deal with the other pandemic of the abuse of women and children. I look forward to our engagement. Your feedback on what is not going well and your feedback on what must change is of great help to us as we are involved in this national effort. I'd like all of us to see this as a collective effort where all of us as South Africans are involved in defeating the coronavirus pandemic, but also defeating gender-based violence. I thank you and I look forward to our engagement.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for that. Really appreciate it. If you've just joined us, it's gone 18 minutes after 6 o'clock. Let me invite you to be part of this broadcast, and you can do that by calling into our toll-free number. It's 0800 142 446. That's 0800 142 446. That's the toll-free number, by the way, if you want to be in touch with us. We're chatting to the President of the Republic of South Africa this evening. He's reserved some time to engage with you with regards to COVID-19, as you know it. Now, this is the virtual presidential Imbizo that we're having, and I would like you to be part of it as well. So use that number, 0800 142 446. Perhaps we can go to the telephone lines already, Mr. President, and let's hear what the people have got to say, some of the questions and comments that they have. I think the first person that we have on the line is Rulani. Let's take Rulani on the line. A very good evening to you, Rulani. We're doing well. What is your question?
Let's take Rulani on the line. A very good evening to you, Rulani. We're doing well. What is your question?
We're doing so well. Thank you so much. Go for it. What's your question?
Okay, my question to Mr. President is, when will cigarette be listed? Because we are struggling to get cigarettes these days.
You're struggling to get what?
Cigarettes.
Cigarettes. Right.
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah, but when will the be listed?
All right. Thank you so much, Rulani, for that. Really appreciate it. I believe that was coming. I could see that coming. I just didn't know it was going to come so soon, Mr. President, really. Let's go to our second caller. We're going to take 3 callers at a time, and then we'll hand it over to you, Mr. President, so you can answer those questions. Here's our second caller. It's Posihle from Eastern Cape. Posihle, go for it.
Okay, hello. Mr. President, good evening. Okay, I was calling because I want to know about this coronavirus. Okay, the symptoms were fever, coughing, and difficulty in breathing. So how is it now? They've changed. It's symptoms like communicating stomach. How?
All right. Thank you so much, Posihle. I believe that's all that you had. We have the third caller. All right. We don't have the third caller at the moment. So, Mr. President, those are the 2 questions that we have for now. The first one is coming from Rulani, and I think it's a question that I foresaw it's coming. I just didn't know it was going to come this quick, though. Rulani wants to know the ban on the availability of cigarettes. When do we see that? When do we see the ban lifted? Is it anytime soon?
Do you want me to?
You can go.
Yes, just Fulani, the ban on the availability of cigarettes. As I have said in my addresses to the nation, we will not be under lockdown forever. So even the ban on cigarettes will be lifted. It is still in place now in terms of our regulations, and I think we should accept it as such, and with time, as we go to another level and another level, the ban on cigarettes will also be lifted. And as I've said, cigarettes are not banned forever in our country. The ban will be lifted.
Right. So the second question that we have, and I believe this one is around, it's around symptoms of COVID-19. Looks like there's a bit of a confusion there, Mr. President, and I'm not putting you on the spot, but initially it was said that it will be sort of like your coughing and difficulty to breathe, but the listener here, Posihle, is worried that there may be more. Can you respond on that, Mr. President? The President?
Well, I'm not a medical doctor. I should say that up front. And from a medical point of view, I rely very much on the Minister of Health as well as the medical advisory committee that the Minister of Health has put together, which advises the National Coronavirus Command Council and government. And some of the things that one tends to read and to hear from all these experts is that, yes, people tend to feel it in their chests. Headaches are part of it, as I've heard, and some joint pains. Those are some of the symptoms, and I'm sure there are many more as people go through the various steps of feeling a little bit sick from coronavirus. And I must say that some are asymptomatic. They don't display any symptoms, and yet they've got the virus. Mm-hmm. So we are rather pleased that those that do get sick do end up in our hospitals, much as our healthcare system is challenged, particularly at this point in time. We do have a relatively good healthcare system, even as it faces challenges emanating from the past. A number of people who have succumbed to coronavirus that is being infected, as they end up in hospitals, many of them do recover, and our recovery and that in itself is quite admirable. And our death rate is 1.8%, well below the world average. So much as the infections are going up, opened, and as you said, the lockdown prepared Eastern Cape to prepare our healthcare system so that put more beds in place. The system is rising up to the challenge with all the problems that it has. But when people land in a hospital, they're given good treatment. And here, I'd like to pay tribute to our healthcare workers, our doctors, our nurses, our paramedics, our x-ray people, you name it, you name them all. They've just been more than fantastic. They are the real heroes and heroines of this pandemic. So we pay tribute to them. The nation truly has to thank our healthcare workers because they are truly the real frontline people. But as we do that, we also have to thank those who are playing a frontline role, as in the soldiers, the police of our country, traffic officers, and many others. We've got a lot of South Africans who are, in a way, putting their own lives on the line. All of us may live, so we pay tribute to them.
Six. This is a toll-free number if you're going to be calling from a landline, 0800 142 446. If you've just joined us, welcome to it. Our virtual presidential Imbizo, together with His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa with us. I'm going to be taking three callers. This is how we're going to do it, Mr. President. So I'll take three callers, and at the end of the third caller, and then you can entertain those questions. The first caller calling from Gauteng, it's Beverly. Beverly, good evening to you. We're doing very well. Thank you so much. Go ahead with your question. Hi, Beverly. Go ahead with your question.
Well, there is someone who's putting a question through to this fellow who's taking notes, but I'm sorry about the sound issue, guys. It's not my stream. I've just got to depend on what comes. But the only reason I'm recording this is because let's hope Hippo Eyes makes a huge boo-boo.
Thank you so much, Beverly, for your question, and we'll definitely answer that one shortly. Let's go to Siyabonga from Port Shepstone. Siyabonga. Siyabonga, Port Shepstone, we're doing very well. Thank you so much for calling in. Go ahead with your question. Okay, looks like we've lost Siyabonga there. Let's move ahead, and we're going to go to Matatiele. We're chatting to Tsidiso. Tsidiso, go ahead with your question. Tsidiso, your question? All right, it looks like we've lost those two callers, but we managed to get Beverly. We'll try to get Siyabonga and Tsidiso back again on the line. Mr. President, here is an issue that you've touched on in your opening remarks, issues that's got to do with gender-based violence. And here's a caller calling in to say, listen, just recently now, I've been a victim to gender-based violence. Now, the problem with this is when she went ahead and laid charges on the perpetrator, the perpetrator came back again, and the police were there at the same time. And she was told that the perpetrator cannot be arrested because they are mentally challenged. Now, here's a big question. Does it matter a state of mind of a person that commits a gender-based violence upon another? How should the police react on a matter such as that one?
Sorry, guys, I can't do anything about it. This is how it's been broadcast
violated
live.
by a person who is mentally challenged. She does need to have redress. And the redress should not be, just go away, go home. It doesn't really matter. It should be the type of redress that will involve the intervention of a whole number of professional people, from social workers, from psychologists and psychiatrists. They should be brought into the picture. It should not just be the word of the police officers, because they may not be well versed in issues that have to do with people who are mentally challenged. And the wound that Beverly is suffering and what has been inflicted on her will not go away unless it is properly addressed to a point where she herself is satisfied. And the fact that it is in the category of a gender-based violence, it makes it worse. So our police should be so well trained as to know that as soon as a case like that is presented to them, they should not, on an arbitrary basis, just dismiss it and just pass judgment. They should immediately be also taking care of the interests of the victim, which is Beverly. They should show care and compassion towards Beverly and not just leave her in the lurch with a limp explanation like he's mentally challenged. And every police station must have access, if not immediate on site, but have access to professionally trained people like psychologists, psychiatrists, who can be brought on board so that they first tender for the needs of Beverly and thereafter then immediately embark on a process of verifying whether what the perpetrator is saying is true or not. So there needs to be a multidisciplinary involvement in all this. And that's precisely what we insist on. Once a case of gender-based violence, be it rape or femicide, has occurred, immediately we want all those disciplines to be brought to bear. We're dealing with the lives of human beings. We're dealing with the lives of women and girls of our country. And we have decided as a nation that we are going to stand up and demonstrate our care and our commitment to getting rid of gender-based violence in our land. So I would have wanted to see the police being more proactive and not just leaving it at saying the perpetrator is mentally challenged. It cannot be the case. And if the mental situation or status of that person has to be verified, it just can't be verified casually. There's got to be a process, but a process that makes Beverly see that justice is being done. So we cannot visit the hurt that she's gone through by just casually dismissing the act that has happened with an explanation that says the is mentally challenged. So Beverly demands justice, and she must get justice.
0800 142 446. That's a toll-free number if you would like to join in the conversation with the president this evening. I'll tell you what we're going to be doing. In the next couple of minutes, we're going to be taking questions from the media houses. We have invited media houses to be part of this program this evening. So get yourselves ready with your question if you're representing a media house. For now, I'm going to take a last batch of questions from our listeners, and then we'll move over to the media houses, and then we'll also take questions coming from social media. Let's go to John from Cape Town. It's a very good evening to you, John. Go for it, John. What is your question?
When they're taking questions from callers, you can't hear anything. That's why it goes deadly quiet.
All right.
Ramaphosa doesn't like the sound either. Did you see that?
Thank you so much, John, for your question. Let's take another caller quickly on the line, and I'm chatting to, I've got Blance. Blance, you're on the line. Good evening to you. What is your question? Good evening to you, Blance. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, guys, while this guy's giving his question for Ramaphosa.
Blance, you're on the line. Go ahead with your question,
please. Remember,
please.
8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we have a live stream with Dr. Peter
We're
Hammond.
going to move over. Let's move over to the next caller. And I believe we've got Kanyisile from Mpumalanga. Good evening to you, Kanyisile. Your question, please.
Yes, how are you?
We're doing very well. Go ahead with your question.
I am not well. We are actually suffering in Pepper. Can I split this because first can tell you something?
Go ahead, please.
Okay, so ukumano ka ukulele kuhlala eBhekani eBhekani province. So before i-lockdown, upresident wacela ukuthi angeke kube kube khona i-load shedding from FM. So ever since i-lockdown yaqala eBhekani we are suffering. Siba ne-load shedding from ekuseni isekuseni mawuvuka apha uyahamba uya emsebenzini uyakhanyisa.
Siyabonga Siskhanyi, siyabonga ngombuzo wakho. Masithathe umunye umameli lapha. I think it's no Melusi. Melusi, good evening to you, Melusi. Melusi, good evening to you. Okay, I think, have we still got Melusi on the line? All right, it looks like we've lost Melusi there for a bit. But we're going to go to those two questions for now, Mr. President. Let's start with the one from John. John spoke about the death penalty, and I believe John is one person that's advocating for that. Perhaps you can touch on that, Mr. President. The second question from John was the one that's got to do with privatization. And of course, it sounded like John is advocating for that. Your response to those two questions, Your Excellency?
I did not hear the second one. I did not hear the second question.
All right. The second question, that's the one from John, and he was talking about how he views privatization as the way to go. Your input and response to that?
Well, let's deal with the first one, the death penalty one. I did not hear the context in which he raised the question. I'm just hearing you relaying just those words, the death penalty. I don't know what he would like. I take it that he would like the death penalty to be reinstated. We used to have the death penalty in South Africa when we became a constitutional democracy and had a Bill of Rights, which is part of our constitutional architecture now. The Bill of Rights contains a very important basic right, which is the right to life. And it so happens that our Constitutional Court some years ago had to reflect on this matter to actually find out what this right to life meant. And they confirmed that the right to life militated against a death penalty, and that led to the death penalty being abolished, because the right to life meant that somebody's life could not be taken from a judicial point of view by the state. We're not the only country that has done away with the death penalty. Many other countries have. And we are seeing situations where more and more countries are doing away with the death penalty in respect for the right to life. And the argument is we are a constitutional democracy. There's a rule of law in our country. And so therefore we are bound by what we committed ourselves to as a people, to the constitution of our land, which has enshrined in it this right, but many other rights that we've got in terms of our constitution. And basically, I know that the argument has always been when horrendous crimes have been committed against our people, particularly women and children, there's always been an argument that bring back the death penalty. And one understands why people have this deep feeling when they have to deal with perpetrators of violence and other crimes against women and children, and indeed other crimes as well, murder and so forth. But we are bound by our constitution. There are other ways of meting out punishment to those who take the lives of other people, particularly women and children. We are been calling for the fact that, once you get involved in a rape and against a woman or a child or a young woman, and once you kill a woman, we are essentially saying that should result in a sentence that will put you away for the rest of your life. Because if you do so, you kill a woman and you rape a woman, you basically are defining yourself outside of the parameters of what we believe is a life that respects the rights of other people. And we're saying that life sentence must mean life, basically means that you must be sentenced to a lifelong jail sentence. You must never come out because you've violated another person's basic right, and it must be a long life sentence with hard labor. That's what we are advocating for. So we believe that there are other ways in which punishment can be meted out against people who perpetrate those horrendous crimes against women and children. When it comes to the issue of privatization, we live in a country that has committed itself to having what you would call a mixed type of economy, where there will be the public sector that plays a key role in the economy of our country, as well as the private sector. Now, certain entities, certain companies are owned by the state, controlled by the state, and others are inevitably and obviously controlled by the private sector. And that prevails in many countries around the world. And we're finding that even those countries that see themselves as, highly capitalist countries also have features like we have in our country, where the public sector owns certain companies and entities, and the private sector owns others. So there are those who've always called for privatize this, privatize this. Now, we are committed to a developmental type of trajectory where we want to develop our country and believe that there are a number of companies that will continue to play a key role in the developmental life of our country. We are not a developed economy, we are a developing country. And so we are a developmental state that still wants to make sure that the lives of our people are improved. And in doing so, there are certain companies and enterprises that must have a developmental thrust. And I'll give you a very good example. Good example, when we attained our democracy, only about 60 or so % of our the people of our country had electricity. Mm-hmm. It had to take a state-owned entity like Eskom to drive the layout of electricity for the rest of the population. Electricity was not available in our deep rural areas because it was seen as a non-profitable venture to go to areas. I remember when my grandmother used to live deep in the rural areas in Limpopo. There was no electricity. And it was only in 1994 when Eskom, under democratic government, was now able to spread electricity to various rural areas and the townships and what have you. And that could only be done by an entity that is publicly owned. Granted, Eskom ran into its own challenges and problems, but the work that's been done by Eskom from 1994 onwards was of a developmental nature, which easily your ordinary privatized entity will never have been able to do. As we restructure Eskom going forward now, we will also be focusing more on the developmental role that an Eskom can continue to play. So there is room and space for publicly owned entities in our country, as there is room and space for privately owned entities in our country. So there are certain areas of economic public life that we believe need to remain in state control, state ownership, and yet there are others that should be in private hands as well.
Right.
Thank you very much.
It is 10 minutes before 7 o'clock. We've got about 10 minutes to go. I'll tell you what we're going to do at the moment. We're going to shift our focus, and we're going to focus now on the social media questions that are coming through. All right, I don't see any media houses at the moment, but I can see social media questions that are coming through. So we're going to focus on those for a bit. The first one is coming from Grenville Skippers, and he wants to find out if you could be so kind, Mr. President, to explain what the rationale behind unbanning of alcohol sales, the lifting of curfew, and withdrawing of roadblocks. And that was a question that came through Twitter. That's the first one. The second one is coming from Sandile Kumalo. Sandile wants to find out, the right to life is of paramount importance. Why was this right not considered when reopening schools and lifting up alcohol bans? That's coming from Twitter as well. The last one, perhaps, that we can entertain for now, Mr. President, is the one that's coming from Louise. Louise wants to find out, she says, I want to know how South Africa is going to use the disruption caused by COVID-19 to pivot towards a better South Africa for all. What detailed, what practical, what implementable plans does government have in order to pivot ourselves to a better South Africa for all? Those are the three for now, Mr. President. Go for it.
Let's deal with the first one from Skippers, what the rationale was in relation to lifting the ban on alcohol. The NEFA Coronavirus Command Council discussed this matter extensively. And as we were going down to the various levels, it was thought and felt that alcohol should be lifted at level 3. And we have indeed gone ahead to open a number of other areas at level 3. Now, the rationale really was you could not keep a number of areas of South African economic activity closed forever. And you needed to reach a stage where we would be able to lift those so that our lives can carry on, but at the same time under restrictions. And there were restrictions that were imposed, but at the same time, after we lifted this, we started seeing, as I have said in an address to the nation, the ugly side of our social life, where there's been excessive abuse of alcohol, which has led to a whole lot of other social ills. It has led to ills such as gender-based violence. It has led to road accidents. It has led to stab wounds, gunfights, and the trauma units in our hospitals were relatively empty during the lockdown period. And after the lockdown, after the relaxation of the alcohol ban, they've now been clogged with a number of cases resulting from road accidents, stab wounds, gunshot wounds, and violent encounters that many of our people have had. And this is regrettable, deeply regrettable. The other part that's regrettable, and this is now the social aspect, is that we are seen as one of the countries in the world that has a high alcohol consumption level. And this is something that I have said we need to have a conversation about. We cannot ban alcohol forever. Where it has been banned. We found that the illicit trades that happen around alcohol, resulting in many more serious problems, such as the put so dangerous to the health of people. Not that alcohol is not, it is indeed when it is overconsumed, but there are quite a number of other side negative effects of alcohol. So that in itself is something that has concerned us as a nation, and that is what we need to focus on. You wanted to know what the rationale did we have with regard to the lifting of the curfews. Lifted curfews because during level 3, all of us do need to have a good reason why we are moving around. The first is that if you move out of your home, you are going to work, or you are going to school, or you're going to buy food, or you're going to for exercise, or jog, or walk, or whatever. There is a reason that is needed why you are out there. And that happens during the course of the day, and that would also happen during the evening. And it was thought that since we all need to have a rationale, a reason rather, why we are out of our homes at that time, that in itself was sufficient, because the idea of a curfew under level 3 seemed to be too heavy restriction, because you'd open up a number of activities which people would be able to justify why they are out of their homes for. I didn't quite hear the question on roadblocks, but roadblocks still are mounted, and they may not be mounted in the same way that they were under level 5, but the roadblocks are still activities that our police, as well as our National Defense Force, rely on to have various levels of control over what is happening. Sandile asks about the right to life and how it impacts on, for instance, schools. Of course, we subscribe to the right to life. What we have said is that the right to life for us is important, and it is sacrosanct. But at the same time, we've also known that we've got to protect livelihoods as we protect life. And in doing so, we've got to create a really good balance between the two. The issue of opening schools was extensively canvassed with parents, yes, with the teaching fraternity, with a whole number of other key role players in our society. And much as it is a risk, just as everything else is a risk, particularly now under the COVID-19 situation, it was felt that it was a calculated risk to return thousands and rather millions of young people back to school, so that we do not lose the academic year, particularly for grade 7 and for grade 12, because those are the critical years for them to move on, and that we would only phase in the latter grades